Hello, everybody. Salam alaikum. My name is Adam Saminsky. I'd like to welcome everybody to the call today. We had over 400 registrants and representing some 40 countries who will be joining us, we hope today, over the course of the seminar. I'm the president of the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, CAPSARC, a leading advisory think tank on energy economics and sustainability that's located in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. We have international experts here at CAPSARC from 24 countries who collaborate with peers around the world, as you're seeing today, to share knowledge, insights, and analytical frameworks. We are delighted that you could join us for the second in this series of webinars on plastics in a circular carbon economy. Today, we're going to build upon the foundation that we set in the first session back in March, when we looked at global consumption patterns for plastics. In that webinar, we heard about the importance of moving away from the linear economy, produce and use and dispose, towards innovations aimed at keeping plastics in a circular economy while limiting waste leakage into the natural environment. We had an opportunity to hear from many international experts, including the United Nations, private sector, and other researchers focusing on policies and technologies that will enable circularity in this area. We learned from our first webinar that there is a need to know more about waste management solutions for plastics. We've decided to focus today on that topic. According to the United Nations Environment Program, only about 9% of the plastic waste that's ever been generated has been recycled. The remaining amount has either been incinerated, dumped in landfills, or has leaked into our rivers and oceans. We all agree, everybody, that this is a serious problem. Yet at the same time, plastics have many applications that make our lives healthy and safe. For example, during the COVID pandemic, still going on, we have witnessed the importance of plastics in protecting our food and in personal protective equipment and so many other areas. Balanced action on a global scale is needed, not only to reduce plastic waste, but also to find innovative solutions to recycle plastics, ultimately reusing them in other applications. That's what the circular economy and the circular carbon economy is all about. In today's webinar, we'll look at the plastics waste challenge with a global lens, and we'll hear about some of the efforts taking place in Europe, the United States, and Saudi Arabia that deal with plastic waste using a circular framework. CAPSARC is happy, delighted, in fact, to have the chance to facilitate these discussions, and we look forward to hearing from our participants today. Now, I'm very pleased to hand this over to our moderator, Sarah Caston, who will provide some housekeeping guidance and also introduce our panelists. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with everyone today to discuss this really important topic and to see how much interest there is from all the stakeholders around the globe. But before we launch into the webinar, I'd like to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. Our panelists know to keep to mute and unmute themselves. But second, we'd like to have our attendees from around the world submit questions through the Q&A box. Last time we weren't able to get to all of the questions during the session, but it really helped us kind of frame the additional issues that the stakeholders around the world would like to hear about in our future webinars. And we'll be hosting 2 more of those in 2021. So please take the opportunity to collaborate within the Q&A box. The next thing I'd like to cover is that we're going to be holding this under the Chatham House rule so that we can ensure some really robust dialogue. And under the CAPSARC approach to the Chatham House rule, we see that it's free to use any of the content that is discussed within the webinar, but we'd ask you not to identify the speaker specifically or to have this discussion on a non-attribution basis. So with that being said, we'd like to move to our first panel, where we'll be focusing on recent developments in Europe and the United States on circularity. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Koyo and Dr. Meidel as our first panelists. Dr. Koyo is the Senior Manager for Consumer and Environmental Affairs at Plastics Europe, and they're headquartered in Brussels. And she will be leading, she leads the global topics such as marine litter and plastics in the environment. And she'll be followed by Dr. Meidel, who joins us from Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, where she's a fellow in energy and environment. Her research focuses on sustainability, circular economy strategies, life cycle management, resiliency of the energy industry, and other related topics. So without further delay, let's jump in to hear from Dr. Koyo first. We'll move then to Dr. Meidel. I'll open up the floor for some discussion, and please, participants, do use that Q&A box so we can get you in on the discussion. Thanks, I'll go on mute now.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. So I'm going to try my presentation now. So just bear a minute. Me. Okay, I don't know if this is right. Can you hear me? Oh, I can't hear anyone.
Yes, we can hear you, Dr.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So,
and just put a slideshow would be good.
Okay. Just sorry, I've got.
Yes, Dr. Phillips. Can you go to display settings?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. But,
yeah, then the first option.
Sorry, I've got a little problem. Okay.
That looks perfect.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Like a little bit of trouble in there. So, so first, I'm just going to introduce like my organization. So I represent Plastics Europe. Plastics Europe is the voice of the plastic resin producers in Europe, with a membership of about 100 companies that covers 90% of all polymers produced in Europe. We are a pan-European organization. We have offices in 5 different regions of Europe, including in the UK. And we've established a strong value chain partnership to accelerate solution-driven approaches to deliver safe, circular, and sustainable solutions. So we are also publishing a yearly up-to-date and comprehensive industry data with some of you might know Plastics Effects, or Plastics Effects reports. So today, my presentation is going to be divided in 2 parts. So with maybe first setting the scene, so complementing what was said by Adam earlier on. And with the second part, this is going to focus more on Europe, on the view, on the issues, on what we are doing as Plastics Europe in Europe. So I'm starting first with showing a few examples of recent scientific publication, which I highlight the extent of the problem. So we have obviously found microplastics in different parts of the globe, and including in the Arctic area and some very remote regions. There are a lot of publications showing that there is a presence of single-use items made of plastics, like globally in different parts of the world. And I'd like to focus a bit on this diagram on the right-hand side here, where you can see in the middle of the circle, like the different aquatic environments. So for example, like deep sea, seafloor, shoreline, riverbed, etc. And in the dark part, which is just after that, there you can see the presence of plastic litter. that is making the most of the litter found in this environment. And then if you look at the outer part of it, so the red part is actually takeaway consumer items made of plastic. So I don't think that I'm going to surprise you here. Like there's no doubt there is plastics everywhere in the environment, and we need to address that. This is a global challenge. On this slide, you'll see the different regions where you can see mismanaged plastic waste. So there is like a lot in the Eastern Asia area, but there are also mismanaged waste everywhere in the world. So we really welcome efforts at the international level and to develop response options to addressing this challenge. Plastics are too valuable resource to be thrown away, and we must prioritize efforts to enable a more circular economy for plastics. And this should include building the capacity for the environmental safe management and for the recyclability and recovery. So what are the solutions? So some stakeholders, for example, the Pew Institute that made the news like about a year ago with their report Breaking the Plastic Waves, are concluding that current government and industry commitments are not enough and will lead to only a 7% reduction in leakage of plastics into the environment by 2040. They are calling for a system change. Others, like for example, the Nordic Council of Ministers, including Norway, but also the likes of WWF, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and the business community, so including ourselves as like plastics industry, we are all supportive of a new global agreement on plastics at global level, at UN level. And that is also supported by many countries around the globe. And we are currently working towards having the start of negotiations on a global agreement at the next UN Environment Assembly, which is going to be held in February 2022. So we, as the plastic manufacturers, raw material manufacturers, we agreed that this global agreement for plastics should be legally binding, with a mix of legally binding and voluntary elements, such as, for example, legally binding country monitoring and reporting, and the development of national action plans. But with leaving some flexibility for countries to develop their own legislation, which is fitted to their own needs. We also support harmonization of standards and definitions because this is really needed at global level. For example, what is single-use plastic? There are many different definitions all over the world. So let's focus now on what's being done in Europe, both by the regulators and by industry. So we start first by the European Commission. So you may be aware of the plastic strategy, which is like a strategy which was adopted by the EU in January 2018, so about 3 years ago already. It is part of the EU's Circular Economy Action Plan, and it builds on existing measures to reduce plastic waste. The plastic strategy is a key element of the European transition towards a carbon neutral and circular economy. So you will see on the slide that the main elements include making 100% plastic packaging reusable and recyclable by 2030, increasing the demand for recycled plastics in Europe by 4-fold, as well as significantly increasing the European Union sorting and recycling capability by 2030. And that should really lead to a number of jobs like being created. It will also include supporting the development and use of innovative materials and alternative technologies and feedstock for plastic production, and also putting measures in place to phase out or replace substances which hamper recycling. Moving on now into like the new circular economy action plan, which was published in March 2020. so a bit more than a year ago. It's one of the building blocks of the European Green Deal. So it's the European new agenda for sustainable growth. The EU transition to a circular economy is expected to reduce pressure on natural resources, but also create sustainable growth and jobs. And many measures will target plastics, as well as their waste, as well as sectors using plastic. So here in the bubbles, you will have some examples. I'm not going to go through all of that, but I will pick on some of them. For example, the EU is currently developing mandatory requirements on recycled plastic content and also essential requirements for packaging. They've also nearly finalized a restriction, a rich restriction on the use and the reporting of microplastics and their unintentional release. And they're working on a framework for bio-based, biodegradable and compostable plastics. These are some of the measures that are being taken. On waste, there's also Europe is also working on to establish waste reduction targets for specific waste streams, developing an EU-wide end of waste and byproduct criteria, and a revision of the rules for waste shipments, with a view to further restrict extra EU exports of plastic waste. The European Union is also developing a sustainable product policy, which is of interest for us as well. And it's also determined to lead the global implementation of the circular economy. And they recently launched an initiative, which is named GACERE for Global Circular Economy Alliance, that was launched at the meeting of the UN Environment Assembly in March this year. And they'll be working to revising some of the legislation for some of the industry sectors that use big users of plastics, such as automotive, construction, and electronics. So a lot is happening on the circular economy, and a lot is happening on the regulation of plastics and their waste. So basically moving on now more about what we are doing and what we are thinking as an industry. So here there's a diagram. I don't know if it's easy to see it, but it shows what we understand as the circular economy. So as part of the circle, we have production, conversion, consumption, waste collection, sorting, recycling. And then as part of recycling, we have two parts. We have the recyclate via mechanical recycling, which will go back into conversion into new plastic parts. But we also have something which is becoming increasingly important, is like recycling into feedstock. And by that we mean like chemical recycling. So I think that for us, like this is fully part of what should be the circular economy. Chemical recycling should be fully part of the circular economy. Still a lot of work is going on with the European Commission and stakeholders to get this accepted as like being part of the circular economy. So what are we doing ourselves as Plastics Europe? So we have developed voluntary commitments in 2018. And as part of that, we've pledged to increase our engagement inside and outside the industry. We are working with global organizations such as, for example, the World Plastic Council, but also we are continuing to lead a network of plastic association at global level on the Marine Litter Solutions project. So if you go into the Marine Litter Solutions website, you will find many examples of projects on marine litter solutions. We also pledge to accelerate innovation in the full life cycle of products, and then to allow the industry to reach in 2040 100% reuse, recycling, and or recovery of all plastic packaging. There's an intermediary target of in 2030 to reach 60% reuse and recycling of all plastic packaging. So, and then we also pledge to continue programs that we have been developing like for a few years now. One being to prevent the leakage of plastics pellets into the environment. This is called the Operation Clean Sweep. It's a global initiative, and this has now been signed by all our members, 100% of Plastics Europe's members. We also have sector-specific commitments to increase reuse and recycling, and we have created together with the value chain like a number of initiatives, such as on styrenics, such as on vinyl plus with PVC and PCEP for polyolefin. I give you a very few examples of what basically we are doing on our first results. For example, we are very proud that following a survey of our membership, we recently announced a significant increase in planned chemical recycling investments from around 2.6 billion euros in 2025 to up to 7.6 billion euros in 2030. To support these, Plastic Shop is calling for the development of a harmonized and a strong policy and regulatory framework in Europe. We are also actively involved in EU research and innovation projects, and I'll give you an example here of Plastic Circle. That's a value chain project, which is actually a partnership with some local authorities in different parts of Europe and on citizens to develop new recycled plastic products, but also to new routes for recycling. And we're also involved in many, as I said earlier, many marine litter prevention projects. And we have one or two examples here, from different parts of Europe. And last but not least, and very important, we are working with the value chain as part of the Circular Plastics Alliance. So that's we are fully engaged in that initiative, which was created 2 years ago, which involves the European Commission that is sharing the initiative. Basically, it's a partnership to promote new voluntary actions to ensure that 10 million tons of recycled plastics are incorporated into new European products by 2025. So there are different working streams, monitoring, R&D and development, including chemical recycling, unrecycled content, on collection and sorting, and design for recycling. So in summary, I would conclude that collaboration with the value chain is very crucial, but not only the value chain, collaboration with authorities and other stakeholders is absolutely key in advancing the development of the circular economy, and absolutely key to tackle the issues of plastics in the environment. So that is the end of my presentation. So thank you all for listening, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Collot, and we will move to Dr. Meidel now, and then we're already getting some good questions from the audience, so we'll hold on those questions until the end of Dr. Meidel's presentation. I think you might be on mute, Dr. Meidel.
Okay, there we are. All right. Can you guys see my screen okay? Is that the right? Okay.
Doing
All
good.
right. All right, very good. All right, so thanks everybody for the invite to speak at this workshop. This topic is right up my alley, so I really appreciate the invitation here. As Sarah had mentioned, I am a fellow at the Baker Institute for Public Policy. We are, like HAPSARC, we are a think tank, and we are nonpartisan. We provide a lot of data-driven analysis on a lot of different domestic and foreign policy issues, including energy and presidential elections, drug policy, Middle East, US-Mexico relations, China, and so forth. And our work is to help bridge the gap between policy and practice. And my work is broad. Plastics and sustainability and circular economy is a portion of my portfolio that I cover. I also cover a lot of advanced carbon efficiency strategies and the global and domestic policies associated with that. So I first want to introduce the topic of sustainability, since this framework is really fundamental for ensuring long-term systems balance. Sustainability in the truest sense is going to be the catalyst to move the energy and materials transition in an equitable, just, and resilient way. What it is, it's a systems level approach that factors in all of the environmental and social and economic metrics, some of which you see on the screen here. And it assesses how they interact. We look at things like subdomains like geopolitics, impacts to indigenous communities, and socio-technical capabilities, just to name a few of them. So it's about quantifying and understanding the risks, looking at the trade-offs, the unintended consequences from a life cycle perspective across the entire value chain. And this is what leads to long-term systems balance. And there's very little understanding or application of this in today's policies and decision-making. Because sustainability, when you look at it from this lens, it's far more complex than environmental preservation or choosing presumed eco-friendly options or switching to alternative energies. And sustainability, it's not a property of a thing. Things in isolation can't be sustainable. It's more of an emergent feature of a whole system. It's not so much about the parts as how the parts work together to enable the overall outcomes that we're looking for. So it's the relationship between the whole system and its environment. And from a sustainability perspective, you can't optimize individual parts without optimizing the whole. And I know, there's great examples where optimizing the parts can be important in a lot of different circumstances, but it's really about designing and managing the whole system that's ultimately required to achieve the end results of system sustainability. But as something as complex as an entire economy or global supply chain, it's more about how the parts are interrelated into the whole system. So oftentimes we focus solely on these individual components. And when we do that, we shift problems to the whole organization, the organization not necessarily being the enterprise, but to the economy and to other nations and other parts of the supply chain. And when we do this, we end up getting the same overall ineffective results. So that's really the framework I wanted to set with this. And so, what is stimulating all this interest around sustainability? Well, more and more we're seeing industries and governments commit to different sustainability targets, global climate goals, and striving for carbon neutrality to meet the Paris Climate Agreement. We have the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Compact. And corporations and governments, they're aligning around decarbonization strategies and sustainability more than ever before. And they're building these into their business strategies through corporate sustainable responsibility and ESGs. And after the recent shareholder and court challenges, companies like Exxon, Shell, Chevron are going to have to accelerate their plans to cut emissions. And so this is going to reverberate throughout the entire oil and gas industry, which is causing more interest in sustainability. And so there's also a lot of investor demand for investor products and financial services that incorporate sustainability and ESG factors. And here in the United States, the Biden administration is really pushing this into the forefront of policies. And so as Adam mentioned in the opening remarks about the linear economy, this is largely what our business models and government policies and consumer behaviors follow, where the system is designed around taking materials, making products, using them, and then disposing. But ideally, the goal is to gravitate towards a circular economy where we design for durability, reuse, repair, and dismantling, and some other elements associated with this. And so sustainability solutions revolve around this model, and it's systems level thinking for achieving some of the local, national, and global sustainability goals. And this model, what it does is that it keeps materials at its highest value throughout its life. And because again, it's a system that's regenerative by design, it replaces the end of life concept with restoration, and it aims for elimination of waste through design of materials, products, and systems. And companies and governments are building core competencies in circular design that facilitate product reuse, a variety of different recycling competencies, and cascading. And an important note I want to mention here is that a circular framework is not necessarily the most sustainable course of action. And I know there's a question in the chat that kind of got to that. which I answered within the chat, but a circular economy doesn't always equate to sustainability. And that's an important point that I just want to underscore. And that's where life cycle assessments can be helpful to help bring data into that. Life cycle assessments, LCAs, as I'll refer to them, they take a cradle to grave approach at evaluating impacts across the life cycle from raw material extraction to final disposal. And it's really important to inform decision making. But the outcome of life cycle assessments is dependent on the scope and the boundaries and what segments of the supply chain you actually assess. So they have a propensity for misinterpretation. So, for example, if you assess the life cycle of only the product manufacturing process, the results could be misconstrued as having an overall life cycle outcome. And this is the case for some biopolymer types and plastic alternatives that don't take into account material sourcing or actual end-of-life disposal, metrics that are commonly omitted from LCAs. And this really affects the overall sustainability profile. So partially scoped LCAs can certainly be useful when we want to identify operational deficiencies and create efficiencies into our system within those specific boundaries, but it can't be used to justify systems level sustainability or to guide national or global policy decisions as it's currently being used in many cases. The other thing I want to mention about LCAs is that traditional ones typically assess environmental impacts, primarily with a focus on emissions. They don't include the full range of environmental impacts, nor do they include social impacts or economic impacts. And all of these components are really needed if we want to assess a true system's sustainability. So for comprehensive insight into the impacts across the entire value chain, it's really important to look at each segment of the life cycle while keeping in mind things like raw material extraction, overseas transportation for processing, manufacturing, and then of course, end-of-life considerations, especially end-of-life management of how something is actually treated, whether that's abandonment, littering, exporting, and downcycling, because not doing so provides only a partial picture of the true impacts from a life cycle perspective. So I do want to highlight some new figures that were published recently over the last 6 months. And I think you might have covered this in your March webinar, but the new figures account for US plastic exports and illegal dumping and littering domestically. And so this places the United States as high as third among countries contributing to coastal plastic pollution. And more than half of all plastics collected for recycling in the United States were exported. And of this, 88% were routed to countries with insufficient infrastructure to manage, recycle, or dispose of the plastics. So the amount of plastic waste generated in the US is that's estimated to enter the coastal environment is 5 times larger than previously estimated. So this renders the United States among highest in the world. And this is really concerning given the plastics generation rate and demand that's projected to increase 4 to 5% every year. And as Adam mentioned in his opening remarks, we generate over 400 million metric tons of plastic globally, and the demand is expected to triple by 2050. And with the majority of plastics that can't be recycled in our current systems because and the mechanical systems I'm referring to, it's because our plastics are too complex. They're multi-material, they're customized, we have a lot of contamination, there's additives. All of these things prohibit management in existing systems. So their fate is relegated to incineration, landfill, or export, where the management and accountability is largely obscure and the tracking is very, very difficult. And the small percentage, around 9%, that is eligible for recycling within our current systems can only be recycled a limited number of cycles until the material degrades and it is downcycled to lower value products. Now, those downcycled materials, although they are recycled, they do have an end of life. So they are eventually met with the same fate, and that's landfilling or incineration. And so this metric, the downcycling metric, is not captured in current life cycle assessments or sustainability profiles. So it really skews the idea of what is actually recycled. And ultimately, this affects the outcome of what is sustainable and what's circular. So even if we improved the economics around collection or with investments in advanced robotics, enhance optical recognition and AI to improve some of the conventional recycling processes. There's just fundamental limitations that inhibit traditional recycling methodologies from recovering all of the different polymer families on the market and entering the end of life stream. So we still need investments in mechanical recycling, and we can certainly incorporate other measures and incentives to improve this, but this will not change the fact that we have to contend with 1 million metric of tons of plastics that's entering our waste system every year globally, a large percentage that can't be managed in our existing conventional system. So this business model, our current system, this linear system is inconsistent with the principles of circular economy, where we want to keep that molecule in play for as long as possible and the material at an economic value. So, and that's where advanced recycling comes into play. And if that is not a part of the way forward, then we have to be comfortable with the outcome of the current linear model. And that is managing plastics in landfills, incineration, or waste to energy, or continued abandonment in our ecosystems. So, so there are some challenges to plastic recycling, and I mentioned some of them. But even prior to COVID, there were existing obstacles that were barriers to the waste recycling industries, and the pandemic was just another reminder of how complex and entangled our supply chains are. So we have linear models that are centered around export. We have decades of dependence on offshore supply chains and foreign markets for critical materials and end-of-life management. There's turbulent commodity markets, low oil, natural gas prices, and cheap landfill rates make it really difficult for recycled materials to compete. Meanwhile, we have waste volumes that are increasing 4 to 5% every year, and very low funding for public works, sanitation, and waste management. They're just not keeping pace with the generation. Because of our long-term reliance on foreign markets, we just lost the incentive to innovate better, higher quality products and solutions and technologies and infrastructure to manage our waste within our own borders, and to transform the diversity of plastics that we're generating into high value materials that can compete with virgin materials. So when we think of plastic waste, we immediately gravitate towards consumer single-use plastics, but it's not just typical household items and consumer products where plastics are found. Plastics are integral components to the energy transition, and they can be found in things like solar panels, wind turbine blades, and their components, electric vehicles, lithium-ion batteries, energy storage systems, and electrolyzers that can help create green energy. And these plastics have no or limited end-of-life pathways except landfill or incineration, or export to secondary reuse or recovery markets, where we just end up shifting the waste management burden to foreign economies. And so plastics and these things, make up 20% of the 55 million tons of e-waste that we send to landfills annually. They account for 50% of the volume of every car, and will be even more with electric vehicles as we try to lightweight them to offset the weight of lithium-ion batteries. And they make up 60% of all apparel fibers from polyester, and then healthcare plastics are another challenge. And I know there was a question about that in the chat, which I answered within there, but the amount and volumes of plastics with the pandemic has dramatically increased. So while we've developed recovery systems for some plastics, we've just failed to see the challenge holistically in ways that address the diverse forms of plastics throughout our entire system and entering our system, that will be entering our system over the coming decades. And so this is where advanced recycling could play a real role here, because it has the ability to manage these types of plastics, or at least has the potential to, and we haven't contemplated or quantified some of these things from an end-of-life basis. So we do have innovative technologies that exist, and reducing plastic waste by chemically converting post-use and difficult to recycle plastics into their original building blocks that can be continually reintegrated into supply chains as feedstocks or for new plastics and chemicals or other raw materials for manufacturing, and also lower environmental footprint transportation fuels without the need for virgin fuels. All of these things can play a really powerful role in driving a circular economy by creating a closed loop system. It diverts valuable plastics from landfills and incineration. It minimizes fossil fuel feedstock inputs. It fills unmet demand for high quality plastics that can be processed in very predictable, controlled and regulated processes, and with controlled operating parameters. And they can be validated through independent third-party certification to certify that the products that result from advanced recycling of plastic meet the specifications. So advanced recycling, it's rapidly evolving. Here in the United States and Canada, there are well over 60 technology providers with significant potential to grow and scale. And there's over 40 operating early commercial scale plants in the US and Canada today. And so when we look at advanced recycling, it is very broad, and it refers to dozens and dozens of technology processes that can purify or break down the plastic to create various outputs. And so I divided them here into 3 broad categories. And within each one of these technology categories, there's also a range of platforms in use. And all of these different technology platforms can be applied, and they give us several different types and distinct outputs. And so I'm pivoting a bit here, and I just want to point this out because I think it is important, but I selected 3 major initiatives here, which I'll describe as competing priorities, because we can't meet any of these goals. And these are not just goals that we see here in the United States, we see them abroad too, but we can't meet these goals without understanding what sustainability is from a system sense, and without understanding the role plastics play in attaining climate and sustainability targets. So there's a lot of no emission vehicle by, whatever that time frame is, 2030, 2040. But as I mentioned, plastics is the 2nd most commonly used material in vehicles after metals. There's over 39 different types of plastic polymers used to make an automobile. And over 50% is plastic. And then we look at 100% carbon-free electricity. And with this increased demand for carbon-free electricity, it's going to increase the demand for complex multi-material plastics that are going to be used in wind blades and solar panels and electrolyzers and so forth. And because of the complexity of these plastics, they're not recyclable in current systems. So what happens with them today is that it migrates to landfills and incineration, or it's exported to secondary markets. Now, there are emerging technologies that are trying to manage the end of life waste aspect of this, but they are still in their infancy. And again, it touches on reliance on offshore supply chains for the mining and processing of these materials. Then there's also the social and environmental justice issues. And then also the other one I selected here was zero waste and recycling goals. Plastics from advanced recycling technologies lack recycling options. And so we have not fully quantified what that looks like when these things reach their end of life or will be decommissioned. I mean, there's a lot of figures out there, and they're astounding. And so we have an unquantified waste problem that will hinder meeting recycling goals, especially if we don't have the technologies to really manage these at the end of life. So the current recycling system needs complementary and compatible technologies to meet these goals. Existing policies that we have are not keeping pace with the innovations at the rate of manufacturing and consumption, and recycling goals are not keeping pace with the best available technologies like advanced recycling. So we really need awareness into the life cycle impacts, into risk shifting, into unintended consequences, and what all of this means from a waste management perspective in order to really get a balanced, sustainable, and circular future. And so, I do have just several recommendations here. We certainly need to improve the economics of collection. So whether we introduce advanced recycling technologies with mechanical recycling, we're still landing on the same challenge that's inherent in our current system, is that we have challenges with collection, sorting, and processing. So we need to finance the collection. We need to increase municipal solid waste budgets to improve collection infrastructure. We also need to take measures to identify and reduce unnecessary plastics where it makes sense to do so, whether that's in the form of taxes and phase outs. And once we identify those, start introducing structured data and science-driven bans, again, where it makes sense. Designing for circularity, whether that's through state level policy combined with private sector commitments, but we can standardize inputs, improve the quality of plastics that are entering the recycling stream to help drive collection. And the thing that I think is most important here is conducting a pilot study and integrating life cycle dimensions into future policies. We don't really have great insight into the feedstock availability, the types of feedstocks that will be necessary to sustain a advanced recycling economy. And so this is a critical barrier here in Texas to scaling advanced recycling today, despite legislation that's very supportive and promotes advanced recycling of plastics. And so I want to close up here with just a couple more points here, is that there is a lot of uncertainty in the plastic waste trade due to recent revisions to the Basel Convention. And this is the convention that controls international shipments of most plastic scrap and waste destined for recycling or disposal. So the amendments bring stricter controls on the movement of this globally, and it went into effect January of this year. And although more than 180 countries are party to the convention, the United States is a notable exception. So this is creating a lot of confusion for how the changes will impact US scrap plastic stakeholders. And we did object to the Basel changes, so it's unclear exactly how plastic exporters will be impacted given the US non-party status. And so, so plastic trading between the US and the Basel countries, the OECD, and some of the other OECD countries will become far more complicated, and it already is causing significant legal uncertainty on the question of whether OECD members will allow future trade in plastic with the United States. And so, so lastly here, I just want to show a time-lapse visualization of world trade flows of plastics from 1998 to 2018. And I think this is important to show here because the transition towards a more resource efficient and circular economy has really strong linkages to international trade. And this just illustrates our connectedness of our global economy and our enmeshment of all of our supply chains, which is why decisions at the local and regional levels should also keep in mind the global context. So again, going back to that systems level thinking. And the pandemic just illustrated how connected our societies are. And if we really want to find a more circular and sustainable future, we have to be cognizant of that bigger picture. So a problem as large as the plastic waste crisis requires global solutions that are tailored to local conditions, but are equally mindful that local solutions could really impact the sustainability of global communities. I think that is the end of my slideshow, and happy to take questions. Oh, Sarah, you're on mute.
Sorry, eventually I'll get the mute and unmute thing figured out. But with that said, thank you to both Dr. Koyo and Dr. Meidel. We have some questions from the audience, but I see that both Dr. Koyo and Dr. Meidel have kind of jumped in and begun to answer those questions. So I'm going to start here with one question on more on the chemical recycling aspects. And there is some controversy in the literature and from some advocacy organizations on chemical recycling. And so what is the thought from the two of you? Is it better to simply invest money in improving mechanical recycling? Or we had one question from the chat of like, why don't we just dump it in an incinerator? So does chemical recycling get us any closer to a circular economy? And I'm going to kind of tag on with that. What is the role for incineration? So if we either Dr. Koyo or Dr. Meidel, I'm going to have you fight it out to see who wants to jump in first.
Maybe I can jump in first, just to say that for us, and as Rachel said as well, is like mechanical recycling is, and chemical recycling is complementary to mechanical recycling. So I think that we need to invest in both of them. And that's not enough. We also need to have, to reach the circular economy, we need to invest also in sorting and separation techniques, and as well as processing. So yes, it is controversial. There is still a need for incineration with energy recovery, but obviously this is not the preferred route. At the moment, when we're talking about recycling, we're talking about chemical and mechanical recycling. Incineration will not even with energy recovery, is not a recycling. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely, there's a ton of controversy and misinformation around advanced recycling. I mean, so much so that here in the United States, it's really difficult to gain traction at the federal level. But, you know, in order to get to a circular economy, we need continual investments and improvements in both systems. I mean, all recycling methods have a role to play in reducing plastic waste to achieve our sustainability goals. And you know, those higher value polymers that already have really strong end markets and successful recycling rates like PET, HDPE, and PE, they can continue to be managed mechanically. But you know, again, once they're downcycled and the quality eventually degrades through multiple recycling phases, that's where advanced recycling can come into play to break it down to its constituent components so that can be used as raw materials or virgin grade monomers and polymers, or even as fuel. But you know, the reality that's playing out right now is that a high percentage of the mixed chemistry, low quality, low density plastic material may never be eligible for recycling or reuse without an integrated waste management approach that includes advanced recycling. And when we look at a circular economy, a critical component to that is innovation. And that's where advanced recycling can keep that molecule in play and add an economic value. I mean, this is what will progress us to circularity. And I think also, you know, I do want to say that you know, if advanced recycling, you asked the question of whether or not advanced recycling can get us closer to a circular economy. I think, yes, it can. But again, you know, circularity in and of itself does not necessarily create a sustainable outcome. And I can't emphasize that enough. And that's why we need a systems level approach, like comprehensive life cycle assessments to ensure our actions align with intended outcomes. Because, you know, the question about how does incineration play a role in this? Well, you know, recycling, although a key category to create a circular value, it can be costly, it can be energy and resource intensive, it creates a lot of waste, and it could yield higher overall impacts across the life cycle than alternative methods. And so in regions of the world that lack recycling infrastructure, advanced recycling technologies, and you know, they don't have the financial resources, the lowest carbon option and perhaps the most economical and environmental choice may be to manage waste and secure landfills or waste to energy plants. And I know that's not socially or politically palatable, but it is a strategy, and it can be a short or medium term strategy. Again, if we look at it from the life cycle and across the entire supply chain.
Sure. So following on that, I'm going to jump and change to a more technical question. And I don't know if we have the answer today, but it definitely would be a good area of research for us all in the future. But one of the questions that we've gotten from the chat is, what is the most used plastic recycling process or technology in the petrochemical industry? You showed one slide, Dr. Meidel, on different processes, but is there any analytical breakdown on which one is used most frequently?
You know what, I don't, I would, you know, I think the conversion technology where we look at thermal, using the thermal platform, such as pyrolysis, is probably the most prevalent. But again, you know, I think this is where we need data and information and analysis to really understand what are all of these different technology categories, what are their different technology platforms, what's the technology type and what are their outputs, and you know, what is the you know, the needed feedstock and the level of contamination that it will allow, and so we don't really have a good understanding of this on specific recycling technologies, and that's an area where I am you know, looking at to analyze, because you know, emerging technologies, and I don't want to say advanced recycling is emerging technology because we've been doing things like pyrolysis for a long time, but they're not well understood by the general public and certainly not the decision makers. And so we need to find a way to distill this and to break this down and to communicate, you know, what it is and delineate it between incineration, because a lot of these technologies are being categorized as a form of incineration, which is why it's not really gaining a whole lot of traction at the federal level here in the United States.
So this is kind of why having the web chat is very helpful, because I think we've just spotted an area for future research to better communicate to the policymakers the distinction between incineration and upcycling and pyrolysis. So thank you very much to that participant who sent in the question. The next question I have is the complexity of doing life cycle assessments. And we have kind of a series of questions that have come in on that. And it's been kind of a water cooler discussion here at CAPSARC. And why is it so hard for us to think systematically on the different options of life cycle assessments and the complexity of it? And how do we get better at that? So I'd like to put that both to Dr. Koyo and Dr. Maidel.
Okay, maybe I start. I'm not an expert on life cycle assessment, but I think that, well, I think it's essential to, mostly in this period of plastic bashing at the moment. So it's life cycle assessment is essential. It brings back the old perspective, the facts, and it's really, it should support a decision-making processes and give clarity along supply chain. So we are, as Plastic Europe, like we are developing data, and we are sharing LCA data. So you can find some eco profile for polymers and plastics on our website. We support plastic sustainability information statements. We are involved in some studies, like for example, with Dankstadt. We contribute to LCA developments and expert discussion, and we are very engaged with UNEP, for example, on the life cycle initiative. So yeah, that's what I can add into this discussion.
Well, and I'll add to Anne's comment, and it's just, you know, life cycle assessments are very difficult. They're highly complex. There's a lot of different components and elements associated with that, and there's no standardization. And with the onset and the push for sustainability, and when we truly look at sustainability and going back to the three pillars, the economics, the social factors, and the environmental factors, when we pair that with current LCA methodologies, they don't align, because the current traditional methods only take a very narrow environmental approach. Again, a lot of focus on emissions, leaving the broader environmental impacts unquantified, things like, you know, solid and hazardous waste generation and disposal, or the effects on biodiversity. And so with the integration of sustainability into unpacking what all these impacts are across the supply chain, and again, you know, learning that our supply chains are so complex and networked across the globe, you know, the impacts are not just at the facility level. They're not just at the national level. I mean, they're global. And how do we quantify that? You know, there's a lot of work being done now on incorporating life cycle costing with social life cycle assessments. But and so there's progress towards a holistic transdisciplinary integration framework, but it is still in its infancy, and you know, there's no real standardized way, you know, to look at that. And the other thing I just want to quickly say about life cycle assessments that I think is important, because we are going to be relying on these more and more in the coming future here, especially with the focus on sustainability, is that, you know, how do we balance the desire for perceived sustainability with reality that life cycle assessments, the results of those, may run counter to conventional wisdom or our own personal values. Like we may not like the outcome of what it shows, because already a lot of the life cycle assessments demonstrate that traditional polymers have a lower environmental, social, and energy footprint than the alternatives to plastics. And so, you know, how do we deal with that? I mean, it's difficult for many people to grapple with that. I mean, would something like that actually be supported, given the fact that we're on a push for a circular economy and zero waste goals?
Yeah, perfect. We appreciate that feedback. We had one question on behavioral change and why people are influenced to go one direction rather than the other. And sometimes it's not based on analytics, it's based on popular conventional knowledge. So we're really interested in doing more of those analytical life cycle assessments and, playing a part as CAPSARC in that knowledge space. So I'd like to take a minute to thank both of you for participating in our first panel and challenging us to think a little bit outside of the box with regard to the topic. And with that, I'd like to take the chance to introduce our next two speakers. It's a great honor to introduce Mr. Mark Vester. He's had a great and long career in the petrochemicals industry. And at present, he holds the title of Global Leader, Circular Economy at SABIC. And he'll be providing us with some insights on the circularity innovations at SABIC. And then we will conclude with Mr. Ziad Al-Shiha, the president of the Saudi Investment Recycling Company. And he comes from an esteemed background of many leadership roles within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So we're really interested in hearing about what the Saudi Investment Recycling Company is doing within the kingdom to help the kingdom meet Vision 2030's waste management regulatory framework. So with that said, I will go on mute and ask Mark to begin with his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It was my pleasure to be here. I think that, yes, Faris, thank you very much for putting the slides on screen. Well, that was interesting and an interesting program until now. It really ties very well into some of the slides that I will also share with you. In SABIC, we have established what we call True Circle as a trademark in 2019 for our circular solutions. And I will lead you towards the True Circle portfolio and go a little bit deeper in some of the elements in that portfolio and talk a little bit wider about what it takes to develop a more circular economy, at least from a business perspective. So if we go to the next slide. Indeed, the challenge is the kind of contradiction, the many benefits that plastics have in our day-to-day life that the typical consumer is not even aware of. The typical consumer is not even aware of how many plastics there are around him and that are making his daily life possible. Yet the consumer is very much aware of plastics in the environment. So if we go to the next page. This public opinion, which is largely set by what the consumer sees, and what he sees himself, but also what he is shown in social media and in documentaries, is really setting his opinion. And that has a big impact. It has a big impact on our industry because this is driving two things. The public opinion is driving the legislator to act, but it's also driving the brand owner to come forward and to pledge for a change in their behavior and in their targets for the future in terms of how they will deal with packaging. And this is having a tremendous impact on our industry. I'm in the industry now for more than 30 years. I've been in various roles. I've been in strategy also in SABIC. And one of the things that I've always been looking out for is where is the disruption in our industry going to come from? It has not come from process technologies. Even IT and the developments in digital technologies are not disrupting the industry. They are much more an enabler and potentially a differentiator. But what's really disrupting now is this outside pressure on our industry. And as you know, under pressure, everything becomes liquid, also our industry. So change is there to come. So if we maybe take a step back and on the next slide, have a look at the wider corporate sustainability program of SABIC. We relate that to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. From the 17 goals, we have identified that there are 10 that we feel that as a SABIC we can make the biggest contribution to. And we have grouped them in 6 pillars. And you see them here on this slide. And on the next slide, you see that with the introduction of our True Circle program, we really aim to address these 2 main pillars of our corporate sustainability program related to circular economy and related to innovation and sustainable solutions. Again, we put True Circle on the market in 2019 as a trademark, but this is not new to SABIC and not new to the industry. The industry has been working on various different types of solutions along the way. Already in 2014, we've been working, for example, on renewable products, but it was kind of ahead of the wave that we now start to see of the pressure that the industry is now witnessing. So the reason to bring it together was to show what, as an industry, we are doing to be part of the solution. So let me show you on the next slide what this True Circle program is about. We split it into 2 parts. One is related to our product portfolio. You could say that the things that we have been traditionally putting on the market, but also an innovation is bringing us to new solutions, as well as services that have to do also with the creation of a more circular industry and circular economy. So when you look at the top line of the slide, on the left-hand side, you see mechanically recycled products. So this is where we are using the process of mechanical recycling, which is a relatively straightforward, you could say, grinding and washing of and sorting of used plastics and then reusing them again. This comes with limitations because very often these streams are commingled, contaminated, and also if you keep reprocessing plastics, also the mechanical properties also degrade. So there are limitations, but it is a very useful way of recycling materials. It is particularly useful for PET, for HDPE, to a lesser extent HDPE, but it's also possible with flexible products, like you see here also some examples on the slide shown. In the middle, you see certified, if we stay on that slide, you see certified circular products. So these are products made with advanced recycling, and the technology we use for that is pyrolysis. I will talk more about these solutions in a moment. So you see mechanically recycled, and you see the complementary chemically recycled solutions brought to the market. Both have as a feedstock source mixed plastic waste, so used plastics. That's what they have in common. The processing is differently. On the right-hand side, you see a complete different alternative, and that's where you don't use an oil derivative like naphtha or ethane to make your polymer, but you use a waste stream from another industry. In this case, you can use, for example, tall oil, which is a waste product from the paper industry, or you could use used cooking oil as a feedstock for your process to produce polymers. So this gives you what we call renewable products. Now, the similarity between chemical recycling in the middle and the renewables on the right-hand side is that in both cases, you are exchanging your feedstock to your current process with a new feedstock. In the middle one, it is a liquid made from pyrolysis, which is called pyrolysis oil, and which has similarities with naphtha. And on the right-hand side, it is a biodiesel or a bio-naphtha, which also has similarities with fossil naphtha. So that's what these two have in common. On the lower end, you see what we call services. So designed for recycling, designed for reuse. This is where you try to keep materials in the loop, but also try to design them in such a way that when they become available again, they can be more easily recycled. For example, because they consist of monomaterial solutions. You make a pouch of polyethylene only instead of a multi-layer complex compound, which is very difficult to recycle. We also realize that in a circular economy, we have to work differently. We have to work differently with both our suppliers as well as our customers. And I will share an example of that also in a few slides. In the end, no single company can make this industry a circular one. This is something that we have to do in partnership and working together differently. Having another approach to also transparency on what it is that you do and on cost structure, on where materials come from, will be required to make this industry more circular. So let us zoom a little bit more in on the certified circular products in the top middle of the page. If we go to the next slide and the next. This is kind of how we present to our customers the concept, which is new to the market. Just think of mixed plastic waste, which is commingled, which is contaminated, which when experts would look at it, they would say, yeah, it's even difficult to make a garbage bag out of it. So almost impossible to use for the purpose of mechanical recycling. Just imagine as a consumer or as a customer that you could use those materials and turn them into products of high quality, in fact, of the highest quality, identical in terms of product safety, in terms of mechanical properties to today's virgin materials. Imagine that this is possible. Imagine that it is thereby also food safe. Dear consumer, would you have an interest in this? Well, this is the message we approached the market with in 2019. Unilever, here shown with the example of the Magnum Ice Tub, was the first to recognize and to say, hey, this is what we need. This will really help us forward in introducing recycled content into food applications, which is not possible today with mechanical recycling. So we worked with Unilever, and 9 months later, the first Magnum Ice Tubs were in the market. The other examples you see here on screen are also live examples, commercial examples, which we supply to our downstream partners, and that are put today on the market and made from the kind of waste that you see on the left-hand side through pyrolysis, so through advanced or chemical recycling of mixed plastic waste. If we go to the next slide. In hindsight, I regret that I took a very simple graphic because building on the earlier presentations, I think we may have gone one step further in explaining how we do it. So what we try to do is that we prevent mixed plastic waste to become waste, but to become a circular feedstock by reusing it in our steam cracker. So the process we use for that is that we take this mixed plastic waste, which is typically going to landfill, although in Europe there's also quite some energy recovery for these kind of materials. We take those and we kind of heat them up in a process called pyrolysis in the absence of oxygen, and then they become liquid again. They become liquid, and that liquid is very similar to the feedstock that we're using today from the oil refineries, a product called naphtha. It's just that in this pyrolysis oil, there are contaminants which are typically not present in fossil naphtha. So we have to decontaminate this pyrolysis oil. We do that in a step called hydrotreatment. So we remove all the double bonds, but we also remove contaminants like chlorines, if you have PVC, but also food remainders, flame retardants, all these elements that are present in used plastics can lead to contamination of the pyrolysis oil, which you don't want to have in your steam cracker. So you need to decontaminate, but then you can go through the existing processes that we operate today, and thereby also make the same virgin quality as we produce today. The only difference is you make them from, it's not waste anymore, from circular feedstock derived from used plastics. So that's what we do. And if we move to the next slide. One of the things we do, so we are putting this solution on the market since 2019. SABIC is the first one to put this as a commercial offering on the market. There's a lot of pull from the market, and we have put many examples with brand owners on the market. But we said, yeah, we also want to use this process and this solution to demonstrate that we can also work differently as a value chain. In the UK, currently, flexibles are not collected. So flexible plastics are not collected at the curbside. So Tesco, as a retailer, has offered in a pilot program the consumer to bring back these flexible packaging to Tesco. And we have worked with Tesco to set up this circular chain where Plastic Energy is our partner that operates the pyrolysis. They provide the pyrolysis oil to SABIC. We make virgin quality polymers. A converter turns that into a packaging, which is then used by a brand owner to put its cheese in, which then is sold again on the Tesco shelf. This is an operation, this value chain, and it is so successful that Tesco has now decided to roll this out in all their retail shops in the UK, providing a solution to the consumer who today cannot go anywhere with his flexibles waste. Maybe important to mention that today SABIC is building a pyrolysis plant together with Plastic Energy next to its petrochemical site, or on our petrochemical site here in the Netherlands, next to our naphtha cracker, combined with a hydrotreater that SABIC is building next to that pyrolysis plant. That project is under construction, and it is the first fully integrated chemical recycling facility that has this cleaning step and that is connected to a cracker to make sure that the used plastics are returned into the materials value chain and become plastics again. This project will be ready in mid-22 and will, of course, help us to increase our volumes tremendously, but we will not stop there. This is just to demonstrate the possibility. It's still relatively small scale compared to the size of our assets, but we are already working on the next step on scaling up chemical recycling to really industrial scale, where you really talk about hundreds of kilotons. And then I'm just talking about Europe. We are definitely also leveraging this concept globally. So if you move to the next slide. Maybe a few words that are related also to the previous speakers and some of the things that have been mentioned already, as things that are important in order to allow for these kind of solutions to materialize. If we go to the next slide. One of these concepts is mass balance, has maybe not been mentioned explicitly, but if you look at a naphtha cracker as we operate them, it has several million tons of feedstock. And then when you think of the scale of chemical recycling, where typically the size of a unit is in the order of maybe 10, 20 kilotons for a single unit, you cannot operate your cracker on one of those units. You need to continue to run your cracker on fossil feedstock and start dosing these new non-fossil feedstock. Whether they are pie-oil made from mixed plastic waste, or whether they are bio, the renewables like I talked about as waste streams from other industries. They are available in small amounts, but we dose them in huge systems. And that also means that at the end of that big plant that we operate, you cannot find back the separate molecules that originate from the pie oil or from the renewable feedstock. They are mingled. So what we do is we use a concept called mass balance. In very simple words, when in our cracker, which produces millions of tons of products, we are introducing 1 kiloton of, for example, pie oil, we can only allocate at the end of the asset 1 kiloton of certificates to some of the polymers that we produce. And this is then what we sell in the market as circular polymers. This concept is critical and under discussion currently in Europe. The concept is endorsed, but the way you do it, there are different ways of doing it, and that's now the devil is in the detail. This is now what the discussion is about, and it's very critical for the economic viability of this technology going forward. So that's mass balance. Next slide was touched upon extensively. This is about life cycle analysis. This is one of the first questions we get. First question is the product safe, and is the product what is the quality of the product? Well, the product of the quality of circular product is identical to virgin, and it is safe. And then the next question is, okay, but what is the footprint? Well, the footprint is better than its alternative. This is a cradle to gate analysis. We have our in-house expert center in India that fully focuses on these extensive life cycle analysis studies. They easily take 6 months for such a study to complete, especially when it's a complex one. And then they get peer reviewed. We don't publish anything without a peer review. On the right-hand side is the circular footprint compared to fossil. And then fossil, you have to imagine that, yeah, if you don't recycle mixed plastic waste through chemical recycling, the current alternative is that it goes to incineration and that you recover the energy content of it. When you compare the footprint of those two, so making fossil as a replacement and burning the mixed plastic waste, when you compare that to chemical recycling, then chemical recycling brings an advantage, saving of 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of HDPE, which is produced from chemical recycling. If you use renewable feedstocks on the left-hand side, the footprint is better. This is in line also with the findings of BASF. We are also in close contact now with the fast-moving consumer goods forum, which are also trying to establish their own independent view on chemical recycling in order to give them full insight in our life cycle analysis. And for those interested, you can find the summary on our website. I think this is a hint. As I said, no company can change the value chain alone. This is just to show also that we are part of many value chain initiatives. JEPCA, Plastics Europe, we are a member obviously of Plastic Europe and CEFIC. We are a member of PSAP in Americas globally. We participate in value chain initiatives to help drive circularity of our industry. So on the next page. These are things that are important to drive in order to create a more circular economy and a more circular business related to innovation. And I think most of these have been mentioned, so I will not repeat them, as well as with respect to regulation. Obviously, we are in the middle of a huge dialogue in Europe. You see this also emerging in Americas. We have the discussions also, for example, in Saudi Arabia, but also in China. This is now really on the radar screen of regulators globally. And I think I see an increased recognition of the value that new technologies can bring. But I also sense that it will be very difficult for regulators to keep up with the speed at which innovation is going to bring new solutions to the market, and it's going to be very critical in order to make speed and to become more circular. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you very much for your attention and look forward to questions later on.
Thank you so very much for those insights. And we will move now to Mr. Ziad Al-Shiha for the perspectives that we're looking for from the Saudi Investment Recycling Company. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll pull my presentation right now. Well, good afternoon or good morning, all of us, all of you, all over the world, and thank you for giving us this wonderful chance. Really, CAPSARC, we are very proud to have such an independent think tank here in the kingdom, led by no less than Dr. Shminsky and the wonderful team of CAPSARC. And the result, we're seeing it today. This is a discussion brought on the world platform to hear best practices from all over the globe. And I did enjoy very much the previous three speakers. And I would like to tell Dr. Middle that we follow your publications on February 19th and also on the waste management and energy transition, as well future of plastic sustainability. And we thank you for that. Maybe I'm a bit biased also for Rice University because I'm also alumni from Rice. But we thank you for publishing such a wonderful research and papers. Allow me to start that by saying that it's always good to listen to policy makers, but at the end of the day, we need to translate those policies into execution on the ground to participate in fixing and making and leveraging the circular economy at its best. Here in CIRC, the Saudi Investment Recycling Company, fully owned by the Public Investment Fund, we have a mandate to take all the great story that we heard today, which is the divergent from the landfills. And CIRC was given that mandate to see how best we can achieve it for the kingdom. And in Riyadh area in particular, diverting 100% of municipal solid waste from landfills and diverting 60% of construction and demolition waste, as well as the 85% of industrial hazardous waste. So executing on the ground to make sure that we will reach those KPIs and those objectives. We were formed by no less than a royal decree for a company like CIRC to enable the private sector and work with all the stakeholders and the private sector to put facilities on the ground to make it happen. We are also cognizant of the Saudi Green Initiative launched by His Royal Highness Crown Prince MBS, where there is a mandate for us to achieve 94% collectively on the entire kingdom, to achieve 94% divergent from landfills. So we have a major mandate for us to take it and execute it. But before I show you what we are doing on the ground, allow me to present my colleague here, Sultan Saif, who we hired from our beloved company, SABIC, as SABIC always brings us really great leaders, and who's passionate about the circular economy. Well, we attracted him maybe because we are attractive and we pay slightly or have better packages, I may say so. But allow me to present Sultan, and he is going to spend something about the innovation in the plastic industry. So please.
Thank you, Engineer Ziad, and good afternoon to you all. So before we speak about the solution and we present our plan for taking the circle and closing the circle towards truly having a circular economy in the kingdom and beyond, we have to speak about the current problem. If we see the plastic market dynamics, it has shifted greatly with having the green fence with China. If we look at the G7, and we see that after the legislations that limited the import of raw material and wastes, we see that between 2017 and 2018, where the legislations were passed, there was a drop of 20% of the import of China of these wastes. With this being said, we have to also see from the other end, what was the environmental impact of this higher export of plastic and where would this plastic end up? we see that just 10 rivers globally carry 95% of the ocean, of the plastics to the oceans. So this ends up with the composition as follows, where 100,000 metric tons ends up in the Great Pacific Patch. The half-life, the estimated half-life of the plastics is nearly 50 to 200 years, depending on the polymer type. This poses as a great issue, which must be stopped and terminated, either at source or at great solutions that can be taken later on. So, the industrial packaging currently holds the highest rates of post-consumer wastes still poses the largest opportunity. Referring to the previous presentations shown by Sabiq and the previous presentation, we see that the plastic production in the current norm ends up with the unsorted plastics that goes either into landfill or incineration, being the top two solutions for this post-consumer products. There is 19% that ends up in the rivers or in the oceans that ends up in the patches as mentioned. Now, the sorted plastics, mechanical recycling is feasible for it. This accounts for around 16%. But still, recycling the unsorted plastics poses a logistical concern. Going from the unsorted condition to the sorted condition to end up with the mechanical recycling, this would still end up with some raffinate and some rejects. These rejects would be most feasible to go into the chemical recycling and the pie oil that was showcased in the previous presentation, where the polymer would be taken down to a monomer that would go into the steam cracker into the generation of a polymer, again, closing the circle. So this presents to you the plastic problem as we see it. Now back to you, Engineer Ziad, for the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Sultan. And so allow me to continue. We did a scan, a heat map of what's happening today in the kingdom on all the waste streams. And the kingdom produces today 45 million ton of waste per annum. Whether on the municipal solid waste, construction, industrial, medical, batteries, tires, you name it. I think we are not in good shape today. And the heat map shows you clearly we're barely green on barely collection. And even collection, we're not doing it through the right ways, or even the segregation and so on. So you can see the great opportunities are already there. And for policymakers, we are a perfect example of what truly needs to be done and worked on the ground. That's why establishing a company like Circ was very necessary to bring to fruition the execution on the ground needed to address all of these major challenges on the ground. We will be focusing on no less than all the streams of solid waste, municipal, construction, demolition, metal and tires, industrial, medical, and also the rest of the waste. We'll be working with all the stakeholders to execute on the ground. We have taken major steps into investments already, hundreds of millions of dollars we spent into taking part of that huge space available to us today to address the bigger picture of managing and recycling the waste. Here, just to demonstrate to you that a lot of these facilities that we are planning to put, and some of them that we have already invested in, and what are the enablers for the sector that we need from policymakers. I will not spend time going through them, but I'll just show you how we are demonstrating, taking what the policymakers are advising us and telling us, and then translating them into execution on the ground. And of course, municipal solid waste is a big portion of what we are seeing today and what we will be working on. So we have a journey from now till 2023, 2035 to basically enable the kingdom to achieve its 100% divergent from the landfills. For Riyadh area in particular, we will achieve it in 2025. We also made, I know most of you, this will be the basics of basics, but this is what we are basically translating the complex issues facing the mankind and the global related issues in the circular economy, and truly translating it into simple terms so that whenever we go to the policymakers, we make them understand what we are after in creating that circular economy. So if you take, for example, on the bio sector, for example, what we're saying, all what it requires is a green bin where we dispose the food, we take it, we make the composting plant, and we create the fertilizers that eventually can go back into that circular economy. Take that on the hard bin or the black bin where all the recyclables are, and then we translate that into paper, plastic, metal, and we again put it back in the circular economy. Whatever we can't digest or take, we're going to be burning it, and whatever cannot be burned, we can produce even RDF, refuse derived fuel, to power the cement factory in the kingdom. So we're looking at the total integrated solution, from the source segregation to the transportation to the material recovery to the refuse derived fuel to composting, waste to energy, and everything. As if we don't have those basic elements, then we can really say forget about recycling, unfortunately, because recycling, circular economy will only happen only if we have the right collection, the right segregation at the source, and then managing it so that we can make the economy, the circular economy tick, if you will. Without that, you can kiss basically goodbye the circular economy on, and in particular to plastics. So we are putting the enablers to the economy for the collection and the right segregation to make it happen. And I think I cannot explain it better than my previous colleague, Dr. Kulu and Dr. Medel and Mr. Vester about the circular economy. I think we're taking the linear economy and transforming it into the circular economy at its best. And that will create only the projects that we are eyeing, which is only a small portion of the major significant for the kingdom. We are looking to add 37 billion additional to the GDP. We're looking to add 6 billion minimum foreign direct investment, creating 23,000 jobs directly only of the facilities that we have shared with you in the journey. And of course, last but not least, the reduction of 13 million tons of emission of CO2 from our basically carbon footprint impact. So what we're saying, we have been created to enable the circular economy, manage the plastics, ensure that we create that streams of revenue and put it in the circular economy to create basically jobs, no less than 23,000, creating the GDP, big impact of 37 basically billion Saudi riyal, and then enhancing definitely the quality of life so that we can always enjoy what we have here, and basically make it a better place for us, and also most important, our future generation, our kids, and the generations that are coming in the future. So I would like to thank you all for your good listening. Here is basically, we encourage all companies and all researchers to really contact us if they have any ideas that will participate, shape, or help the circular economy, either through investment or through basically R&D or whatever it takes. Please, you can scan it here or write us info@circ.sa, and we are within reach to respond and take it further, as we have clear deadlines by the highest authority in the kingdom to take all the policy and translate it into execution on the ground to create the circular economy and divert 100% from the landfill. I thank you all for your good listening.
Thank you so very much for those two presentations. And we have some great questions from the audience. So what we've heard in the last panel is really, hit on some of the issues we discussed in the first. I really appreciate that the slide that we saw in the second discussion on the role of the G7 countries and the way that they export this waste to least developed countries. And so we do have one question asking the slide on exporting plastic waste from the US to the developed world. So I think I might be pushing a little bit hard, but how do we use these innovations, the good news that we heard that SABIC is doing, and all of the work that is being done by CIRC to enhance the circularity in the kingdom, how do we leverage those and make sure that these countries that have inefficient or non-existent waste management, how do we make those, the good news stories apply to countries in the global south or the developing world? And I'll go mute and let both of you jump in.
Thank you for the great question, Sarah. Definitely, this was actually the point that we wanted to illustrate. With the right legislation and right policies in place and controlling this export of waste, the generator becomes conscious and puts through the right measures. For example, with the initiatives that SABIC, and I'm sure we were in the webinar a couple of days ago actually with SABIC and Basel together, and we saw that there are some innovations and initiatives that actually controls the waste from source. So from the generation side, you don't generate the plastic that will end up being exported. You incentivize this recycling of the plastic in the producer country. So this will limit the export of waste and entices the private sector and supported by governments towards recycling within the countries and closing the circle at each country.
Of course, there is another element. I think you asked it, Sarah. I think you received that question, which is basically factoring in the total cost. You know, we use tires, we use plastics, we use everything. There is, like in Europe today, there is €1 per tire, as call it eco tax, call it whatever you want to call it, but it's already, even if you buy a coffee machine today, when you buy it, you have to buy it, you have to pay an eco tax, because eventually it has to be recycled and put into, which is basically not much from the total value of purchasing those items. So I think factoring in those total costs from a policy perspective, and that's why it's very, very important today what we're hearing from our policy think tank, and all of these now, somehow they need to hit the ground and see that it is being executed, so that we factor it and we all become really guardians of the planet, if you will.
Yeah, maybe also a reflection from my side. I think when you look at certain regions and the differences between regions, they mainly come from infrastructure and regulation. When you look at collection and sorting and current practices in terms of landfill and incineration, it's very different from region to region. But also regulation in terms of, for example, the existence of EPR schemes in different regions, which can help to organize for, to pay for, and to also to drive the economic business model for collection and sorting. Just look at the price of landfill, even within Europe. The differences in the price of landfill create huge problems, and they create also the flow of materials, which I think have to be stopped. I would personally advocate that plastic waste should not be exported from, for example, from Europe. We have to keep them in Europe and solve this in Europe for various reasons. I think that as a company, for us, definitely, we are in a position to leverage technologies and to bring new concepts like advanced recycling also to other regions than Europe. And this is also exactly the scope of our partnership with CIRC, for example, in Saudi Arabia. But we're also developing this in other regions. But for a single company to drive the implementation of such things as EPR schemes is difficult. That's really something where I think the public and private sector have to come together and drive jointly for this. And this goes beyond just the petrochemical companies. This would also include the support, or would need the support of, for example, brand owners, as companies that ultimately decide on the form of packaging and also the placement on the market of such packaging. All of that needs to come together, and that is hugely complex, but also very necessary. I sometimes hear people also saying that plastics in the environment are a behavioral thing. Littering is a behavioral thing, but plastic in the environment is not just littering. It's also sometimes because of the way that we as a society, through our regulation, have set up our waste collection, sorting, and handling. And that is not just people throwing the plastics away. That's also societies exporting plastics and making it thereby a problem of someone else.
Thank you for that. I think until recently, a lot of the dialogue around the topic was just finger pointing of, hey, you're the producer, you're the consumer. It was not much of an informed discussion on a holistic approach. So a lot of the dialogue that we're hearing today is that we all have a hand in it. This is a plastic waste getting into the environment is a political, an economic, a social, a scientific, and information and international relations. It's all of these issues, but taking an analytical look at it and incorporating those life cycle assessments and incorporating the science approach rather than the gut emotional approach is something that we're trying to advocate for. So I'm gonna ask one last question before we move to the final. How do we encourage those public-private partnerships between the producer, the consumer, the waste management infrastructure? How do we make sure that those linkages are a little bit more efficient? It's exciting to hear what the Saudi investment recycling company is initiating here in the kingdom. And how do we look at that as possibly a model for other countries? So I'll leave that and ask Mr. Al-Shihada to begin with that question.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think you positioned it well, but in the text of your question. It's really basically, it's the circular economy at its best, where each and every individual in that circular economy works and have the responsibility and creating a win-win. Why do we think creating that circular economy in the kingdom is a win-win for everybody? Take it from the polluters or the origination of the garbage, for example, the household or the commercial. We think they're gonna be winners because they will not see littering on the streets. They will see better arrangements of that. They will see better educated kids and future of that generation to have more responsibility, so they will benefit, reap all the benefits of that educational element and environment. And by the way, we are very, very pleased to see that the younger generation, I have 3 daughters, none of them use plastic bags anymore. They just have this, what they call it, the SAG or the sack or something. They go to the supermarket and they get their stuff. So the younger generation are very, very cognizant of that. Then you come to tell the municipality, look, if you do that, then you stand to gain a lot of material that could be sold in the market. You go to the government and you tell them, you will be creating jobs. You go to also the Ministry of Petroleum or Energy, and KAPSARC, I know, is leading those development. And you know how much the cement factory is burning every day? 80 to 100,000 liquid barrels, each barrel factored or priced at $60 or $70. You can tell them we have refuse derived fuel that you can take it replacement, just like the rest of the world. They do it in cement factories, they do it in glass, they do it in steel. So you don't have to put this in the landfill, let it evolve methane, and you go and burn that CO2 incremental barrel. You can reduce the hydrocarbon footprint or the CO2 footprint. So to me, by telling everybody it's a win-win-win across the entire supply chain, the GDP wins, the creation of jobs, you can save even money and create value for the economy and show it in practice. I think if we manage, we as executioner on the ground and policymakers support us with those wonderful, frameworks, I think this is a win-win for everybody.
Thank you for that. So on that note, we do appreciate all of the questions that came in. There's not enough time to cover all of the details. I thank our speakers who have taken the time to answer them as we go, but all of that documentation will help us kind of frame the next discussion the same way that the questions we took and our March webinar helped kind of influence the direction we went with this session. And so with that said, thank you very much to all of the panelists. Before handing it over to Dr. Fahad for the close, I'd like to thank Faris Al-Otaibi, our man behind the scenes, for making this go so smoothly, and also my research partner on this, Amar Al-Hazazi, for being an excellent person to work with to get all of our speakers lined up. And so thanks to Mar. I wasn't sure if there's anything you wanted to say before we hand it over to Dr. Fahad.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I just want to recognize, well, first of all, I want to thank the speakers for their insightful presentations and great discussion, and also all the attendees that were able to make it today. And I would like to thank all the team that worked together in making this happen, our events and management team, our communication and media team, as well as our external partners. And it's been a pleasure, as always, Sarah, to work with you. And I hope that we continue this partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, we'll hand it over to Dr. Fahad to help us close out this session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a great time management, just on the mark. And I would like to thank all the participants, all the panelists, for a very insightful discussion. As mentioned by Sarah and our president, Adam Szymanski, this is the second webinar in our series of plastic and the circular carbon economy. We aim to convene think tanks, NGOs, policymakers, as well as private sector, as Ziad mentioned in his last remark, to help us understand a little bit more about the complex topic of plastic in our modern lives. On both pillars, I mean, social, economics, and environmental dimensions. The speakers from the first session from Plastic Europe, as well as Baker Institute, have definitely helped us get more insight on both the challenges as well as the opportunities from a European as well as North American perspective. The second panel has provided a deeper understanding of some of the circularity innovation from SABIC, one of the largest global petrochemical companies. I was impressed by Mark's presentation and the program, the True Circle program. And I think we will reconnect with Mark on the innovation, as CAPSARC is leading one of the energy innovation programs here in the kingdom, with many participants, including the ministries and other actors in the energy sector. It was also a pleasure to connect and hear from Ziad and Sultan on how CIRC is making an impact on the ground, as he rightly mentioned, translating policies and goals from policymakers to actions in the ground. Very ambitious numbers and very ambitious goals for CIRC, which will position CIRC to serve as a model, not only in the country, but also in the region, as well as around the globe. Speaking about CAPSARC, while this is a plastic webinar series, CAPSARC is also conducting policy relevant work that supports the circular carbon economy, the concept that was introduced during G20 last year, as well as other climate change related policy issues in various other ways, including the CCE index, which measures how different countries are coping with their carbon management using practical approach to solving climate challenges. We're also working on another project, the Climate Adaptation and Mitigation Partnership, which examines different scenarios to meet climate goals while incorporating the circular carbon economy framework. This work is in addition to our regular work as a think tank, as well as an advisor to the energy ecosystem here in the kingdom, including issues related to energy efficiency, energy pricing, hydrogen, power sector energy transition, as well as blockchain-based carbon accounting, among many other topics that we focus on. Many of these will, especially the CCE index, as well as the climate adaptation and mitigation partnership, we will announce a number of webinars in the next few months. At the end, I would like to thank our panelists again, as well as the more than 150 participants who engaged in a very insightful questions, enriching the discussion, as well as framing our series for plastic in the next seminars. We look forward to collaboration with this community of interest in the months to come. And at the end, thank you all. Have a great day, and looking forward to see you soon, inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fahad. Appreciate it. Very well said.